Are you wondering when your winter squash is ready to be harvested and how to store it properly for winter? In this video, I'm going to explain when your squash is ready to be harvested, how to harvest it properly, and then how to store it so that it will last a long time into the winter months. Welcome to Healthy Fresh Homegrown, the channel for families who are wanting to grow their own food at home. I'm Marc, a published author of 2 gardening books with over 15 years experience growing food for my family. And I want you to have the same experiences and benefits of growing food for your family as well. If that interests you, then please click below to subscribe and turn on notifications so that you know when the next videos are coming out. So this is what's left of my Kabocha squash plants now at the beginning of October. As you can see, they look pretty sad with leaves that are pretty well dead. I have actually already trimmed some of the leaves off, and the actual squash are looking about ready to actually harvest. So I did have some problems back in the spring when I actually planted these for the first time. I tried seeding them in my greenhouse, but they ended up rotting away. We had kind of a cool stretch of weather, and I guess I overwatered them. These things can happen. So what I did is I reseeded, and I actually directly seeded in about the beginning or mid-May. And those ones actually took off then and produced quite some growth on this recycled A-frame trellis that I built out of my daughter's old crib. Squash are ready when, you know, the leaves are starting to almost fall off by themselves. They're brown. They have some, maybe even some disease on them like mildew, and just basically the plant is looking pretty sad. Now, you also want to look for kabocha or squash that are actually starting to get kind of dull in color. If they're still shiny, they're not ready yet, and they're not ripe. Also, when you lift them up, they should feel fairly heavy for their weight. These ones are fairly small. They didn't actually grow that big because I think they just plain ran out of time in the summer. And there's even some really tiny ones here. This one's maybe not as dull, but it's also wet, so it's kind of hard to see. But this one was also pretty well ready. You also want to look for stems that are starting to get a bit dry. These ones are still a little bit green, but I think they're pretty well ready to harvest. The other thing that you can check for is if there are any tendrils left. You can check for tendrils close to the plant that are starting to shrivel up. All of these tendrils are actually shriveling up, so this is not the best example. But if the plant is still doing very well, but you see that the tendril closest to the squash is actually shriveling, then it's time to cut that squash at least off. So to harvest, I usually use my garden pruners. Make sure they're clean, but you can also use a kitchen knife. Just be careful you don't cut yourself. And what you want to do is just cut the stem off, or it might actually snap off. There we go. That actually snapped off. Got dirty in the process, but you can see that I've left quite a substantial bit of stem on there, and that's just to make sure that there's no rot going into the squash through the actual stem. So we'll put that in the harvest basket. We'll grab this one as well here, and actually that one snapped off too. But if they don't snap off, then definitely cut them off with a pruner. You don't want them snapping off at the very bottom like I explained, too close to the actual squash. If there's anything on the bottom like a dried up flower, all of these have fallen off, but if there is, just clean that off as well. And we'll just continue harvesting them all the way around. And once they're all harvested, I'll show you how to actually store them. So as you can see, this little guy, the stem is actually quite green and probably could have been left, but it's not going to probably grow any bigger. This is probably the biggest it's going to grow, especially in these conditions where the temperature is getting down to about 10 degrees Celsius or about maybe 50 or so Fahrenheit, and that's too cold for them to really continue growing. So we'll just cut off some more and I'll return and tell you how to actually store them. I unfortunately had one that actually broke off. So my advice to actually just snap them off, you might not want to try that. Better to cut them off if you can. Now it's not a big problem. What we can do is we can try to eat this one first, and it also has a little bit of scarring and stuff on it, so this is actually a good candidate to maybe eat first for dinner, maybe even today. And as you can see, I've got a nice harvest basket full of kabocha. They are a little bit on the small side, but they're perfect for small meal, or you can also of course do more than one at a time, and these will probably not store for very long, but I will still show you how to actually store them coming up. Final thing to do really is to just cut all of these apart just into short lengths, and I'm going to actually put them on my compost. Some people do just layer them on the ground as a mulch, but I think with our rainy and wet fall and winters that it's just going to end up getting really slimy and messy. So I am going to pop these in my compost, and then the resulting compost I can actually use on my garden beds. I think that's a much better idea. Just going to go ahead and cut these off and get them onto the compost. So before I show you how to clean the squash and properly store it, here in my small bathroom in the basement, I know it's a weird location, let me know in the comments below if you've grown squash before, what kinds you have grown, and what you like to make with the squash. So what kind of dishes. So one mistake that I made last year when I picked my squash, harvested my squash, and stored it is that I didn't actually wash it. So I think I just knocked off some loose dirt and just put it in my pantry and left them there. And about a few weeks later, I found this white stuff literally growing on the outside of the squash. So I found out that was basically mildew and kind of a white mold. And we were able to luckily wash it off, and we washed the kabocha really well before we cooked it, and everything was fine. So this time I'm not going to make that mistake. So some people will use a chlorine bleach mixture, about 1 part of chlorine bleach to 10 parts of water, but not everyone wants to use bleach, which is a harsh chemical. So you can also use hydrogen peroxide, mixed about 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 with water. Or what I prefer to use is just plain ordinary, basically pure white vinegar. And so with these kabocha, all I'm going to do is to just put a little bit on this cloth here. Try not to spill any. And then I'm just going to basically wipe them down. And it does smell a bit, of course, as vinegar does, but that's okay. And then just basically give them a good wipe, give the stems a good wipe too, and especially the bottoms if they were resting on the ground instead of on a trellis. And you can see how nice and clean and I would say unblemished they are, and that's because they were hanging on a trellis. If you have them on the ground, they usually develop yellow spots, and they might also get a little bit of scarring, but these ones are almost perfect. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to actually place them here on this ledge in my small bathroom. This bathroom is good in the sense that it's down in the basement. I can keep the door closed. It's got a fan, which is actually running right now. And also, it's got a window. Now that window goes into the greenhouse. I could crack it open if I find it's getting too warm in here. And then I can go ahead and kind of ventilate the room a little bit. I don't want the room to get too damp though. So if anyone has a shower or something in here, then I would probably have to move them first. But right now, no one's really using this bathroom. It's a second bathroom with a shower, and we're not using it right now, so that's good. So I'm going to continue to clean these with the vinegar, and then I'll give you some other tips for storage. So the other thing to check for is, remember the one that the stem broke off? I've put it here so that I can actually use it first. And any ones that maybe have a little nick, like this one here, I'm not sure if you can see it. These ones also you want to kind of use first. Now if you have too many of those, what you can do is cut them up and freeze them raw in bags and use them later. Or what you can do also is you can also cook them first or roast them in the oven and then just blend them up into a puree. Some people keep the skins on, some people peel them, and then you can use that for a soup later. And usually you can store these for a month or two at least. Just have to keep an eye on them, and if you see any that are getting any signs of rot or any signs of deterioration, then make sure to use those first. Ideal storage conditions is actually around 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, or about 50 to 55 Fahrenheit. Now this room is going to be a bit warmer than that, but again, I don't have that many, so I probably will be able to use them up within the month or so. But if you have more, then you might want to consider finding a rodent-free and fairly dry storage location outdoors. So maybe a garden shed, and also make sure that they're not touching each other. So I've tried to space them out about at least ½ an inch apart, about a centimeter apart. And the other thing too is keep them away from any ripening apples, pears, or any other kind of fruit. A lot of fruit actually gives off ethylene gas when it ripens in storage, and so these might be affected by that and ripen too quickly. And if you do find any that are starting to rot, you can actually usually cut that rot away and use the rest of the squash. But if in doubt, then compost the whole squash if it's too far gone. So as you can see, harvesting and storing squash is a fairly easy process if you follow the right steps and keep in mind the tips that I've given you in this video. And so if you have any questions that I didn't cover in this video, then ask them down below if you have any questions about harvesting squash or storing it. And also check out my other video here on 5 vegetables that I'm still growing in my fall vegetable garden that are doing much better than the poor squash plants that died off during the cooler weather that we had last month. So thanks for watching, and good luck with your harvests.